Welcome to Percolating Perspective, the podcast that explores the many flavors of American culture, all while sipping on a hot cup of coffee. I'm your host, Gordon Michael Porter. We are going to take you through a journey through the diverse and ever-evolving landscape of American society, from the bustling streets of New York City to the laid-back vibes of California. We delve into the people, places, and ideas that make up this great country. Each episode, we sit down with you to discuss the art, the American idea, the culture. That is what we're here to discuss. We tackle everything from food, fashion, politics, social issues, all with a fresh perspective and a steaming cup of coffee in hand. Grab your favorite mug and let's get started on today's episode, where we discuss a little bit of America's music. Before we get started on today's music, I want to hit the drip of the day. Today is nothing fancy. I literally went through the Dunkin' Donuts line on the way to the studio and just got a black cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee. And oh, you just can't beat it. I mean, again, it's nothing special. Like, there's no special flavors. There's nothing particularly exciting about it, but it's just a good cup of coffee. It's like McDonald's. You know what you're going to get every single time, and what you're going to get every single time is a really good cup of coffee. It smells good, it tastes good, it warms you up inside, and it gets you moving. Again, not exactly an exciting cup of coffee, but a well-deserved cup of coffee. All right, I'm going to edit that part out. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, with all that aside, again, it's a very simple drip of the day today, but nonetheless, a good drip of the day. I hope you feel that way, because I certainly do. Dunkin' Donuts is just good. I'm going to give you a challenge. If you can go back through all of the drips of the day, through every episode, and count up how many times I say it's just good, I don't know what, we'll have to get you some merch or something. I mean, it's got to be a lot. It's got to be at least 50 out of the past 25 podcasts, including this one, because I just said it again a minute ago. All right, let's talk a little bit about American music and where it came from, what it looks like now, and everything in between. So early on, we have Thomas Edison basically bringing what we would call the phonograph, which was the first ever device to record the human voice and to produce, or not produce it, but to copy it. And of course, it took about 5 seconds for people to realize, hey, we can record music with this thing. And lo and behold, that is exactly what happened. We started recording music with it, started recording some of the best singing voices around with it, and mass producing that sound. Later on through culture, we get into various different styles and types. We go, through the jazz era, through the 1920s itself has a distinct sound to it. Through the 40s, you get into the 50s with rock and roll, and country music starts coming on the scene in the late 40s, early 50s as well. And, folk music has become, that's older than, the recording itself. So, we're going to kind of dig into this a little bit, not too in depth. The biggest thing I want to point out to you, though, is where we're at now, and we're going to discuss that a little bit at length. But if you go back and listen to music from the 20s and the 30s, it's pretty laid back. Something that really characterizes music from back in that era, the 20s and 30s, the early 20th century, is strings. And you have big bands, you have brass instruments, you have a orchestra essentially accompanying a singer, a single singer, sometimes a quartet or a duet, but almost without fail, or it almost always is a single singer. You have people all the way from, Tony Bennett, who was discovered by Bob Hope back in World War II, who, by the way, is still alive, and just, I think, a year ago, cut a single with Lady Gaga, which is just incredible. He's, I think, 90 or 91, maybe. He might be as much as 93. But anyway, people like Tony Bennett, Frank Sinatra later on in the really, really hitting the height of his fame in the 50s and 60s. Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr. At the same time, you've also got people like Hank Williams, Freddie Fender, Willie Nelson, Johnny Paycheck. All of these guys are kind of going along at the same time and really shaping the American sound in two different worlds, they're the same industry, but two completely different genres. And then, at the same time, more closer to the 60s, mid 60s, late 60s, you have really the rock and roll movement starts to get a foothold. We really start seeing that come on the scene in the 50s, but it really doesn't, take off as what we now know as rock and roll. Back then, they would have called that something like rockabilly or something like that. But later on in the 60s, you start to get, the REO Speedwagons, the Aerosmiths, the Beatles. So you get a lot of these things going on at the same time, which, the Beatles is not an American band, but, it had a enormous impact on the American culture. And in fact, a great book that you can read on that is Killing the Culture by Bill O'Reilly, where he just dissects all of these bands and phenomenon like Elvis Presley, the Beatles, I'm trying to think. There was a couple other bands in that book. I can't remember who it was, but he goes through how those bands, while they in large part shaped American culture, he analyzes and considers if those bands and if those groups actually did damage to the American society or if they did not. That's an interesting take. I think it's something to think about. I don't know whether or not I agree 100% with that. I think it's certainly possible and certainly worth looking into. I think it might have killed the American ideal. Not so much the American culture in the sense of we as Americans did not start coming apart along our community seams until several decades later. But I do think it's possible that what we knew as a free and clean and moral society started to degrade around that time. Now, whether that was a result of the music or whether that was a result of just society in general, that is kind of what that book goes into and kind of discusses and talks about. So let's take a look at that. Killing the Culture by Bill O'Reilly. That talks a lot about it. But you go back to the teens in the 20s, you have people like Al Jolson, Irving Berlin, who really started to shape American music as it stands. Before that, we had, composers and things like that, but we didn't have a true music did not have an American identity where it does now. And that really started to come about in the teens and 20s with Al Jolson. I think it really is probably the man that really put a label on American music, coupled with a man named Eddie Cantor. Now, full disclosure, if you go listen to these guys, I like listening to them just from a nostalgia point. But it will get on your nerves. It's a very high-pitched, whiny, kind of excited sound. But, again, I love listening to it just from a nostalgia standpoint, a historical standpoint. However, it's not exactly something that I'm going to, have on my playlist for exercising. And really and truthfully, the reason for that is I don't exercise. Talk about American culture, I think I fit in pretty well there. Moving kind of forward, though, and getting into the diversity that we talked about a few minutes ago, you start to see music intertwine itself with, movies and video. And we really see that starting to take place with none other than the beautiful Judy Garland with Wizard of Oz in 1939, where you have, movies that have been, up to this point, for the vast majority of them, have been silent films. Not so much in the 30s, I will say, though. Around 1932, 33, we started getting some great movies that were featuring Cary Grant, John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, some really great movies that were not silent movies, not silent comedies or anything like that, but really didn't feature a whole lot of music other than maybe some pre-recorded background string music that was, kind of canned. But along comes 1939, The Wizard of Oz with the beautiful voice of Judy Garland, and this is not canned music. This music is, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, If I Only Had a Heart, all of these. This is the first musical that ever really took America by storm and affected the culture, was The Wizard of Oz. And, not only did it affect the culture, but, you're still seeing the effects of the culture, by way of music long after that. The score of that show, that movie, is, I don't know how many times the score of that movie has been remastered or re-recorded by different artists. In fact, one of the most well-known renditions of Somewhere Over the Rainbow is a Hawaiian man by the name of that's his nickname, but plays that song on a ukulele and sings it. And unfortunately, he died not too long after recording that. I think he was only 32 years old when he died. But point being is that was almost 100 years later, 75 years later, I think it was, that song from that movie hit culture again and had an enormous impact on the culture again. So that type of music, the big band, the jazz that came into the movies back in 1939, we're still seeing that in our culture now, although not in a. It's all reviving the dead. It's not giving birth to new. And then you fast forward up into the 1950s, where you have Elvis Presley, you have Buddy Holly and the Crickets, you have a lot of these old rock and roll guys, the Penguins. A lot of interesting changes happen to the American culture, and we go from the 30s and the 40s, which was a very moral time, almost one could argue pious time, although I don't think it's that. I think this was, right around the end of the Great Depression, so people started to really get a grasp of what was important in life, because money, we just had a rude awakening and realized that money was not all that important, because you can survive without money. And in fact, whenever the economy explodes and falls apart, think about this for a second. The Great Depression lasted 16 years. And to put that into percolating perspective, 16 years ago would have been, 2005? Is that right? That's 18 years ago. So let's see, 2007, 2008, 2009. So we're talking 2009 to now is how long the Great Depression lasted. That's incredible. That's an incredible thing to think about. The Great Depression, of course, something like that has an impact on music and an impact on culture in general. 16 years is an incredible, that is, best, or I would say that long case scenario, 2 presidents, short case scenario, 4 presidents, if you take into consideration 4-year cycles. That's an incredible length of time to be in a economic depression. That is, of course, going to have an enormous impact on the culture. And so you see that reflected in the music, where you have, Bing Crosby, all the songs are very uplifting songs. They're not the dreadful, depressed songs about, people, cheating and leaving and, all this madness that's going on now. Back then you have, blue skies staring at me. It's all happy, upbeat songs that are meant to get people out of a depression and literally get them out of the depression. You have people like Doris Day at this point with, Pillow Talk and, Sentimental Journey. Yes, there were some downtrodden songs, we might call them, that were specifically pointed to the soldiers and the guys overseas back in World War II, but they were all more about missing home and more about missing your girlfriend or your wife. And, nowadays we spend more time singing about not having a girlfriend or not having a wife, and if you have one, that you're an idiot. It's just a radical change in the culture that is presented to us through music. And I will say, I think I mentioned this in the last episode, culture is absolutely, upstream of politics, and meaning, culture directs culture directs politics. It directs the mood of the country, and I think that what we're seeing right now is a direct reflection on what the political class, the elite class, the ruling class would like for American culture to look like. And you might be asking, well, Gordon, what does that look like? What are you talking about? What do you mean? Here's what I mean. Over the past 100 years, and we'll call it 80 years prior to the past 20, you had distinct genres. You had distinctly American-sounding music. Again, country and Western. You had jazz. You had rock and roll. All these that, rock and roll wasn't so much distinctly American, but, we'll just, for the sake of argument, we'll specifically talk about country and Western and jazz. I think those two are the most American of the genres. And let me just pause here to say, rap is not the great African-American art form. Is not. It is jazz. You go listen to Count Basie, you go listen to Oscar Peterson, some of these guys, back in the really as late as the 80s, but in the specifically between the 40s and the 70s, you talk about, absolutely mastering music, knowing the piano could play the piano forward and back without even thinking it. Ray Charles, all these guys that were able to, they understood music. They understood theory. They understood the math behind it. It was intelligent, and the lyrics meant something. And now, the argument is that rap is this great American art form, and it 100% is not. And there's a distinct reason why we are being told it is. And that point is what I was getting to just a few seconds ago. If you look at all the American music we have right now, all of the genres that we have, and just to name off a few, again, country and Western is still, at least in name only, present. We have jazz in some form or fashion is still alive, although it's been relatively choked out by the large record labels and is really kind of a byword and a footnote in American history. But if you look at all the genres that we have right now, there is no distinct difference from our music to any other music in the world when it comes to pop culture. And there's a distinct reason for that, and that is American culture, the American identity, the American exceptionalism, the individuality that America has enjoyed for centuries is purposely being eroded right now. It is purposely things like music that directly impact the culture and tune the culture, no pun intended. Those things are not being removed and taken away. They are being whitewashed, and they are being flattened, and they are being turned to grays instead of blues and yellows and reds and greens. They're turned into different shades of black and different shades of white. There is no flair anymore. Everything is cookie cutter. Everything is exactly the same, and that is exactly what they want culture and they want our society to look like. They want everybody to be exactly the same and look the same, think the same, dress the same, listen to the same music. Why is that? It is much easier to control, and it's much easier to control groupthink if everybody thinks the same way. And I know this might sound a bit overboard, and it might sound like a bit of a conspiracy theory. I don't believe it is. people know, just as well as I do, and so do the elites, and so do the people that are, in charge of governing the world right now. They know just as well as you and I do that music, it grabs the heart of people. And if you control music, and if you leech music of everything that is individual and unique about life, if you drain that and you drench it out of the lifeblood that it once had, you will take the culture, you will take society, and you will squeeze the blood out of it until there's nothing left. And that is what's happening. Jazz and big band music, it's not even about the type of music. Think lyrically with me for a second. Think about, Blue Skies that, Bing Crosby sang. Think about what Bing Crosby did with music. He directly not only was involved in many movies that we still watch today, including White Christmas, the movie by the name of Blue Skies. We also had Holiday Inn. I'd say 90% of his songs were either love songs or they were ballads about the United States and her founders. There's a song called Abraham, in which he talks about Abraham Lincoln and the things that he did. There's a song about President's Day. There's a song about, God Bless America that was written by Irving Berlin. There's one called You're a Lucky Fella, Mr. Smith. That was Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra, specifically talking about how lucky somebody would be to be an American citizen and how incredibly lucky we are to live in a country like America and how much we take it for granted. Listen to that song, You're a Lucky Fella, Mr. Smith. You can find it on Apple Music, YouTube. I encourage you to do that and really listen to what we once thought of as, what we expected from American culture and American music. Another thing to really consider is, what the market demands. And, it used to be that every artist that was worth its salt, whether that was, Dean Martin or even Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, Tennessee Ernie Ford, all of these big names, whether or not they were Christian and believed in Christianity, there was almost a market obligation to produce a gospel album. All these big names all knew the market was Christian, and they all knew that the market, they knew who their audience was, and their audience was Christians. And their audience, meaning America, was steeped in Christianity. And, that's something that is being leached out of our music now is traditional values. Music now is about divorce. It's about cocaine. It's about drugs. It's about abuse. It's about all these things, and not in a negative light. And I part of me wants to say I encourage you to go look up some of the, just a random rap artist's lyrics. The other part of me thinks that you might get arrested with something horrible on your phone in your search results if you do. And that's what I mean by, rap being the great American art form. If music truly does guide the culture, rap music is certainly not the direction we need to be going. The culture has rot in it, and it is to the beat of a inner city album, and that's just the plain and simple truth of it. There might be some weird rap album that has some streak of morality in it. And by weird, I mean, like, I don't know if you've had the awkwardness to listen to Kanye West's quote-unquote Christian album. It's pretty weird, a little unsettling in some places, and it's not at all his best work. And that's kind of my point. There is certain music that lends itself to be worth listening to, whether that's genre or lyrics. And Kanye West's album, the lyrics are pretty weird and the music is not that great. I wouldn't really consider it rap. It's not rap, and Kanye West never really was rap. I mean, there was elements of rap in the music, but Kanye West was more of a pop guy from the very beginning. But my overarching point here, though, is music directly affects the culture. Music grabs the heart of the culture and leads it. And right now, what we are seeing is music all across the board in every genre, is being leached of any sort of virtue. And if you go listen to the latest country song, you can't even really call it country western anymore. There's no western element to it anymore. But if you go listen to the latest country song, and then you go listen to the latest pop song, and you go listen to the latest rock song, they're virtually indistinguishable, lyrics or otherwise. Why is that? Well, you have to go to the source and you say, okay, well, where's the money? Where are these albums coming from? Where's the money where these albums are coming from? Well, they're coming from big record labels, RCA, Sony, all these big, Capital City Records, all these big companies that are paying for music to be produced. Something, I don't know if you've noticed it or not lately, but big companies have a tendency to get in bed with the government. And big business lately has a tendency to, might be a little bit on the woke side and a little bit on the left side. And if you think that just because you're listening to a country and western album, you think that the people who are producing that are conservative, red-blooded Americans like yourself, you are wrong. You are dead wrong. And I hate that, and it's a sad thing. I was raised on country and western music. But the fact of the matter is in being raised on it, you just automatically assume that everybody in the business is, American freedom-loving people, and they're just not. They're not. And, the result of that, or rather the implications of that are we are now getting music that has been completely drained of the lifeblood, and it's intentional. And I know I've said it before and I'll say it again. Music has such an impact on the individual person. It has an impact on the culture. And if you take that away, if you change it, and if you make it like unsalted potatoes, you're going to get a culture that is like unsalted potatoes. And that's exactly what we have right now, is a culture that is bland and it's ugly. You see that in our movies. The movies that we see right now, I can't tell you the last original thought that Hollywood had. I swear to you, if I see another Batman reboot, I am going to chuck. Creativity in America is all but gone. And I think the reason for that is because music is dead. And it's not that music itself is dead. It's that the companies that get music to your door and get music to your earbuds are specifically selecting music that is just trash. It's garbage. It's worthless. It's fodder. Ed Sheeran is not his, which he's not an American anyway, which explains a lot of it. But his music, if in 100 years from now, if I am, privileged to still be alive at 128 years old, if I'm privileged enough to be alive, I promise you that Ed Sheeran's music is not going to be remembered by anybody. It's awful. It's unsalted potatoes is what it is. And I know this is opinion, but, I think it's a good opinion. Otherwise, I wouldn't be saying it. But it's not so much that Ed Sheeran is bad. It's that now every artist on the radio and in Apple Music and Spotify, every artist that comes on the scene now sounds exactly like Ed Sheeran. And it's lyrically, also, there is no variety anymore because culture is not what the market is demanding, or at least the artificial market, the propped up market by the big record labels. The big record labels don't want variety, and they don't want nuance. They don't want creativity. They want unsalted potatoes. They want something that they know is going to sell with zero risk. And, it's unfortunate, but, and how they do that is, it's all visual. We're in a very visual society right now. So, if you're covered in tattoos and have half of your head buzzed and you're wearing black and your jeans got holes in them and you're wearing, Chuck Taylors that look like they've been through, my mother's garbage disposal, then you're in. You're good. And, that's fine. That's what they need. That's what they want. It might not sell 100 billion records, but it'll sell 1 million. And, that's money in their pocket with zero risk. And, forgive me for, I know this podcast is a little bit of a rant, and the reason it is, music is about 85% of my life, possibly 90% of my life. I was raised on it. My father was raised on it. My brother was raised on it. My grandfather was raised on it. We're a very musical family, and music means a lot to me, and music means a lot to America. And America really is defined in many ways by music. And I think in many ways there's several genres that are explicitly American. Whenever you have artists like I don't know, Brooks and Dunn, or all the way to even Frank Sinatra back in the day, when they go to the Netherlands, guess what language they're not singing in? Dutch. They're singing in English. And the reason is all these cultures love American music. Why? Because it sounds like, a bunch of people hitting their wooden shoes together? No, because it's distinctly American. It's creative. It's wonderful. It's exceptional. And as we continue down this road, I think it's important to remember that, a discussion we've had several times on this podcast is the way all this changes is you getting involved in the culture, you getting involved in music, you getting involved in movies, you getting involved in politics. The only way this thing changes is if people who truly are creative take the market by storm. It's called a disruption. It's a disruptor society that we live in right now, which is a good thing for us because that makes it a lot easier to disrupt the industry and to get in there. And I know that's a much easier said than done, but it's time for us to be creative, and it's time to share our creativity with each other. Creativity is something that binds human beings together as people, but also as friends and as individual little communities. Creativity is what binds us together in many ways. You go to a farmer's market or a street market or street fair or something like that. What really piques most people's interests is not the prepackaged stuff. It's the handmade. It's the homemade. It's the stuff that took craftsmanship and time and effort and thought and heart. Artificial intelligence will never be able to replace something like that because it's not human. And to that point, I think that's where we're getting to a lot of our music is not that it's artificial intelligence, but that it's not human anymore. It's not creative anymore. It's squeezed out of a tube like a McDonald's hamburger. And again, this is a rant, and this episode is a rant, and I recognize that. But the reason I'm ranting is to encourage you to take inventory of what we have right now. Take inventory of the lyrics. Take inventory of the music. Take inventory of what the culture is producing. It's not producing anything good. It's not producing anything, and it might not be that what it's producing is not necessarily bad, like, the majority of rap music is. It's just wholly not good. It's not palatable. It might be, palatable compared to other things in the culture. But you look at, people like Frank Sinatra, who, he was described by Don Rickles, who is one of the greatest comedians who ever lived, and one of my comedic heroes, Don Rickles, Mr. Warmth. He would talk about, in fact, he actually talked about this on a TV show called Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee with Jerry Seinfeld, and he was talking about his time with Sinatra in Las Vegas and his friendship and relationship with Sinatra. And he said, and we're talking about Don Rickles here, he's no slouch when it comes to publicity or public appeal. He would say, they'd be out at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning performing in Las Vegas. And they would leave and they'd go to an all-night diner to get something to eat. And he said that when Frank walked in, the room stopped. And the reason is people resonated with him and his music. They loved him. He was larger than life. He was surreal. And his ability was surreal. His voice is incredible. And it's, even going back and listening to old recordings, it's shocking how good he was. And while that might be the case today with musicians and artists now, that's not showcased. It's in fact, it's discouraged to showcase that. What's encouraged is you follow this pattern, A plus B equals money. And that's not American. And I can back that up with some facts, actually. Just this past week, the Washington Post released a survey of what Americans believe is important to American culture. And in that survey, the number one thing was no longer Christianity. It was no longer patriotism. And in fact, it was something like, I believe it was in 1999, 75% of the American people believed that patriotism was important to American culture. 75% believed that. This year, actually, let me back up a little bit. 2019, that slipped, not a ton, but it slipped to 61% by 2019. So in 10 years, we went from 73% down to 61%. So a definite slide, but nothing, that's to be expected just given the climate. 4 years later, today, that is down to 30-something%. I think it was 32%. In 4 years, patriotism has slidden down the rail. But across all metrics, the one thing that all Americans unanimously believe is important and is integral to being an American is money. Ladies and gentlemen, that is terrifying. America never has been about money. America never has been a place that sustains itself because it believes in money as its God. But we're there, it seems, unless I hope and pray that survey was wrong. And, I don't know necessarily what the study group size was, and it could be something like that. But the point being, there is a radical slide downhill in things that matter. And there's a shocking uptick in the things that wholly do not matter. And I think there's a case to be made that our music has maybe not led the charge in that, but has held the coats while American culture has been stoned. And I don't mean stoned like Willie Nelson. I mean like killed by rocks. America, I think it's time we do some soul searching. I think it's time that we look inward and really, really, really think about what we want our country to look like moving forward. And if we want our moral, God-fearing society back, we need to really, really, really understand that music is critical in that. The market and the people do not, or rather the market and the government do not dictate creativity. Rather, it's the opposite. And that's why it's so important to the ruling class to eliminate creativity, just as the Nazis did back in the 1930s and 40s. America, I love you. Everything about you. I think you're sick now. You're ill. But I do think that you still have a bright, big, beautiful tomorrow. I will never, ever give up on America, the land that I love. I will stand beside her, and I will guide her. And I will lean on Almighty God to do so with a light from above. Until next week, think about your music, think about what you choose to listen to, and maybe change your tune a little bit. America, I love you. God bless. Take care.